at that point. Well, Carolina wasn't really one of the bad teams in the NFL. They're a team that just moved up to the number one spot. But the Houston Texans were downright awful most of the season, but they were able to have somewhat of a final gasp win for old Lovie Smith, who probably will never coach another NFL game in his life, as well as the head coach. He'll probably come back as a coordinator, but literally that was the final stand for Lovie Smith. And Lovie Smith said, I'm not going out as a loser. So Lovie Smith wound up winning the game, and it forced a chain reaction to where the Texans, who were due to draft first, wind up drafting second. And this kind of threw them into an influx because a lot of people feel like they traded up to go get Anderson. No. They traded up so they could secure Anderson and draft Stroud. If they weren't going to be able to make that trade, Anderson was going to get drafted by the Texans and Stroud would have still been on the board. And when the Colts said that they were straight and that they didn't want him, that's what opened up the door for them to go ahead and do that deal, because the Cardinals have a quarterback already. The Cardinals knew that they would be able to get their offensive lineman with a later pick because Paris Johnson was never going to go anywhere higher than 6 or above. So they knew exactly what they were doing when they did what they did. So the Texans kind of got tricked into making this deal happen with Arizona and giving up a lot of future real estate with the idea that this will put their team in a better position moving forward and get them back to the playoffs much quicker than, say, a 3-year rebuild. It turns into more of a 2-year rebuild because you have the cornerstone of your defense, you have the cornerstone of your offense. That's the mentality that the Texans are coming with. But when you really look at it at the end of the day, this team has a lot of things to fix. They have a brand new first-year head coach who may be not the most experienced type of guy to be your head coach at this point, because you look at DeMeco Ryans and you know he's a hell of a player. You know he's a hell of a defensive genius, defensive mind. But sometimes you have to wait on good coaches like that to show up and actually start, being able to be successful in a situation like Houston. And when you look at the way that this is setting up, you know that these guys are going to have slow starts, but they're going to have great finishes to the season. I think that Bryce Young is probably a little bit more ahead of CJ because of his attitude and how he knows that it's going to be a struggle here. Nothing's going to happen overnight. We know that it's a growing situation here with this team. And we know that Frank Reich might not be the right coach for this franchise because Frank Reich is coming off of coaching a team and being fired mid-season with his last team as the head coach. So you question exactly what type of leader he truly is. But you know that he's trying to input a good system here in Carolina, something that they haven't had in the last few years, a consistent system. And then you still have a defense to really bank upon as well, too. So those are things that they can really look to and say, okay, we can move forward and possibly have a really, really good season this year. And we play in a division that's very winnable. Believe it or not, the South is very winnable, okay? The Bucks can even put their hat in the ring and possibly try to steal something out of this division as well, too. So there is no way you can say, okay, the Saints are running away with the South. The Falcons are running away with the South. That's not true. This is a wide open division. But when it comes to the AFC South, that's another wide open division. But Houston's roster is not set up to be a top team in that division yet. They can ruffle some feathers. They can spoil some games, but they're not ready to be the top team yet unless they're able to get a little bit more from their veterans and then have some surprise players as well, too. I truly do feel that CJ Stroud feels very entitled to being an NFL starter and that even with mistakes that the coach ain't going to bench him. But that's not true. We're not at Ohio State anymore. And in his biggest games, he had his biggest mistakes. And I feel like your biggest game in college is the NFL every week because the matchups change, but you're playing against the best of the best. And so we really need to see exactly who CJ Stroud is week in and week out. Bryce has already shown us what he's capable of doing at the highest level. CJ Stroud, on the other hand, hasn't showed us what he can do at the highest level. Yeah, he had a great game against Georgia, who's an NFL type defense. But you look back and you say to yourself, what happens when you play in a game against a team like Michigan's defense? And you're going to run into about 7 of those this year. So what are you going to do, kiddo? That's the biggest question. So for all the folks that thought that these two were going to be Madden creative players and that their teams were going to be division champions the first season in, well, the reality is set in, and the NFL is a tough league. That's all I got to say. So with that, we're going to switch gears up a little bit before we go to our first commercial break. And where we're going to go with this, we're going to go into talking about some boxing. We got Ugas and Barrios will be added to Canelo Charlo for a WBC eliminator. So, on August 30th, we do have, not August 30th, but on September 30th, we have Canelo